Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to talk a little bit about MFAs, particularly MFAs in creative writing. I wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, kind of my application process, my tips, I guess, on the application process. I'll probably make another one on low residency programs in particular, since that is what I'm doing now. But yeah, I just wanted to talk through the application process a little bit, especially because application season is coming up. And so I was like, this whole process is super mysterious and it's really hard sometimes to find information. And being in an MFA program now, I understand the desire and the need for discretion, just because it's a very small community, and like sharing too much information can be a little bit weird, because you want to feel like you're going out like talking about your program, which is usually probably a very small cohort of people, or talking about like your actual like classmates or professors and things like that. I feel like it's a little bit different than the undergraduate level, where you might be at a really, really large university. However, I do want to be like as honest about things, at least like I said, the process and some of the methods that I used that was helpful for me. So that's what this video is going to be about. If you're interested in the MFA process, especially from a creative writing sense, but maybe even a little bit from any type of MFA, even if you're in visual arts or something else, then I think this video might be helpful for you. So stay tuned. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up and leave a comment if you have questions or suggestions or reactions. And if for some reason this video is not exactly what you expected and you feel like you're not vibing, you can simply exit out the browser that you entered. This channel is a troll-free zone. So it goes without saying, if you aren't aware, that the MFA application process is super challenging and stressful for no good reason. And it's just really, really hard to get into. So the MFA is the Master of Fine Arts. So obviously you're studying art of some, or an art practice of some sort. So it could be like visual arts, music, theater, vocal performance, creative writing, film, a number and assortment of things. And it is notoriously hard to get into an MFA program, because unlike other graduate programs where there are a lot of, I guess, kind of like specific metrics that you can go off of to anticipate your acceptance, everything in the MFA process is really based on your creative work. Your portfolio is single-handedly the most important part of your application, regardless of where you are applying. If you wanted to go to law school, you may not get into, Georgetown Law or Harvard Law or something, but you know that if you get a certain score on the LSAT and you do certain things, you're going to get in, right? Same with like medical school or an MBA or any other traditional master's program. If you maybe had a certain GPA or got a certain score in the GRE or something, you're going to get in. With an MFA, regardless of where you went to school or your grades or anything, most of them don't require a test, an entrance exam. You don't know if you're going to get in. And so that's kind of the scary part, because there are so many talented people, and because some programs might be looking for talent and others are looking for potential and everything in between. It's just notoriously really difficult. The programs are small. They're not always very funded. New cohorts can be as small as like 5 people, as large as maybe like 20, which still is small in the scope of all the people who want an MFA. And so acceptance rates are really small. They're typically like single digits. There's kind of like an infamous story that when Shonda Rhimes had graduated, and she was like living in her parents' basement or her sister's basement, I can't remember. But she was kind of like, I guess, thinking a little bit about film school, and she saw this article that said film school was harder to get into than medical school, and she was like, bet. And so she applied and she got into USC, and the rest is history. You'll also hear a lot of people that it took them multiple multiple applications to get into their MFA program. So it's also something that you see people attempting to do multiple times. It's kind of like an average. I think it's like 2.6 times on average before someone gets into like their creative writing MFA program. And so with all of this in mind, I definitely saw it as kind of like a marathon and not a sprint. So I think when it comes to applying for the MFA, your portfolio is the one thing you should spend the most time working on. You're going to have to send your transcripts, which is fine. A lot of people get concerned because most graduate schools will say that you need at least a 3.0 at the undergraduate level. And many of us didn't have that. I really want to emphasize, don't let that stop you from like applying somewhere, because ultimately that's kind of something that's there from typically the graduate school itself, not the actual program that's running the MFA, as just kind of like a placeholder for entrance. But there are ways around it. There's a lot of people who get into MFA programs, they don't have 3.0s. Some schools will even create, they have a little slot where you can address a lower GPA if you would like, and you can write something for it. If anyone wants a video on that, on like how to address that situation or what you can write, please let me know. Like, I'm more than happy to help with that. Again, I have experience from my own process and also from years of being like a college access counselor. So if anyone wants to know about like, oh, how do I like address a low GPA? I say low in quotes because it's like low, like what is low? That's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, if you want to learn more about how to write one of those statements, please let me know. I'm happy to do a video on it if it would be helpful. So yeah, there's that with like the transcripts. So you'll send all of that in. And then you have your personal statement and your letters of recommendation. So your personal statement, I think for a lot of people is the hardest. Even as a writer and someone who's applying to creative writing, like writing about yourself, it can be very weird and difficult. I like to break it up like this. The personal statement should be an opportunity to know you, your work, and your goals. So those are like the three things that you can think about. It does not have to be exactly in that order, although I think it's the most expected and the most compelling way. But you need to think about, at the end of a personal statement, someone should have a better sense of you, a better sense of your work, and a better sense of your goals. Breaking that down a little bit further, understanding about a bit about you can be thinking about your household. Were you from a single parent household? Were you the youngest of 10 kids? That kind of thing. Where did you grow up geographically in the world? Did you have like one solid hometown? Did you grow up between a lot of different places? Maybe you want to talk a little bit about where you went to school and what you studied. There's a lot of people who come into MFAs and they were always on that strict artistic path, and others come from a lot of different fields, from law and medicine and engineering and design and education and homemaking and a lot of different things. So you might want to talk about the career that you've had or the degree that you just completed or whatever the case might be. And then you can think about your work. So what do you write about, or what do you paint about, or make music or films about? It's helpful to think about the challenges in your work, the things that you feel you do really well or that you wish you were better at. And typically you want to include some influences. I think influences is weird because a lot of times if you think about influences on your work, you might think that like your work has to model itself in some shape or fashion after the people that you name, or it might just seem really weird to feel like you're putting yourself in conversation with people that, you know, might seem very like elite to you. The easiest way I can describe it and the way that I looked at it is I said, who are my favorite artists? Like, who are my favorite writers? Who are the people whose work I read and I'm like, dang, I wish I wrote that, you know? So I looked at it not so much as like influences from a technical standpoint, but like, who are my favorite people that I want to be like when I grow up, right? When I'm established as an artist. And then just picking one or two things about them. You know, I remember just Young Lee is like one of my favorite poets, and so I talked about like just loving the way he uses language, and like the emotional aspects and the tenderness in his work. Talked a little bit about, I think, I want to say perhaps it was Colson Whitehead, and just like how he like subverts point of view and like brings in historical context into his work. Don't be afraid to be yourself. Like, they're not expecting you to be anybody. They want you to be yourself. So I came from a bit of a film background. I love film and I love music. So I talked about some of my favorite directors. I love Christopher Nolan. I love M. Night Shyamalan. They have these very, distinct styles, and also they create really cerebral work. Like, what I love about their films is that you can't just like sit there and watch them and be like, oh, this movie's cool. Like, you have to think, it's the kind of movie where like you sit there and you go, oh my gosh, that scene I just watched an hour ago makes so much sense now, and you're like rewinding and like putting things together. Their work really encourages the audience to like engage in critical thinking, to truly understand it and appreciate it. And I want my writing to be the same way. I want someone to like read a poem or a story or something that I wrote and get to the end and be like, oh, mind blown, and have that moment and want to go back and like consume it again and like see new layers each and every time. Even though they're obviously filmmakers, I talked about how their use of storytelling in cinema creates a certain response, and that I want to recreate that in my written work. Like, this is your moment to like geek out about things, because when you get into your program, you're going to be around a whole bunch of other people who are also geeking out about things. And I think that's what's really nice. So when you're thinking about like your work and influences, just think about your favorite people, the people that you would want to collaborate with, like who inspire you to do things, who you want to be like, and just talk about what you like about their work. It's not really expected that you're going to have the full lexicon around what type of art you're creating, but just describe it as best as you can now. And then last but not least is your goals, right? So it's like, why this school, why an MFA, why now? And so you will really want to talk about like what your goals are in your art. It could be something specific that you want to do. It could just be something that you want to learn, skills that you want to grow, curiosities and questions that you have. That's the part where you talk about that specific school, that specific program. So you could mention faculty, elements in the curriculum or the program structure that you feel, the setting that you feel will facilitate you learning and achieving those goals. Really, it can be that easy to approach it in that way and to think about it in that structure. And it really helps you to fill out the page count as well, because sometimes they ask for longer personal statements, and it's kind of like, how am I going to talk for 3 or 4 pages, about whatever. But usually I think if you can get about 2.5 pages down, you should be good at most programs. The letter of recommendation. So you're definitely going to need 2. I think there were some places where I sent 3, but you're definitely going to need 2. And instructors are really important. So undergraduate instructors, or maybe even graduate instructors, if you are like, if this is like your 2nd or 3rd degree or something. A lot of people get concerned. They're like, I've been out of college for 4 years and I can't ask. I was out of college for like 7. Hadn't talked to either of my professors since the day I graduated, or like even a year before if it was an older professor. And they were like more than happy to do it. Like, it's important to remember that like this kind of comes with the territory. If you are teaching people, like, you're going to be expected to write letters of recommendation at some point. It's something that most people have, professors have probably done a lot, and it's not going to stop or change anytime soon. So don't feel bad about it. If you get ghosted or someone doesn't respond, don't feel bad about that either. That also happened to me, and it's totally cool. But yeah, just ask them. One of my professors had actually retired and wasn't even working there, but like they had her like email that you could use, like post on the website. And I was like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, blah, blah, blah. And it feels super awkward. But they were both really awesome about it. And they wrote my letters, and that was great. And then I had 2 more letters. One was from a colleague who could just talk about me now and who I am as a person, and also who could speak to like my ability to teach as well, because I thought that might be helpful for some of like the full res programs that like included teaching components. And then I had a creative mentor who I only knew for about a year. This was actually her first time writing a recommendation, so she was like super nervous about it, but she did a great job, and she wrote that for me as well. So I had those 4 letters that I could kind of rotate around based on like which program. Again, if you want to talk about like strategy, I think that's more of a personal situation of maybe which letter to send where, but I can do a video on that if it's helpful. Well, even if they don't know you well, that are enthusiastic about supporting you, always remember that you should be sending them, like your resume, maybe a current writing sample, something that they can kind of get a sense of as they're writing the letter. So it's okay if you haven't talked to them in a long time. You can always build them up to speed. You might even like get a coffee with them or chat on Zoom or something if you have the chance, if you want to create more of that connection. But definitely make sure that you have at least one instructor, because it's really important to do that. And I wouldn't ask someone who you've only known for like a couple of months. Don't run to like the most prestigious person in the world. I had a professor who was pretty prestigious, I guess, if I think about it actually. But it didn't necessarily make a difference. Like, there was still a bunch of places I didn't get into, even like with his blessing. I don't think that who writes your letter honestly matters at all unless they have a personal connection with the person, with someone who's on the committee. Letters themselves are not going to get you in. It's going to be your work. It's always going to be your work.